So Martin, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. How are you doing?
All good, all good. Obviously, we're here, the King Center. What does this facility, this organization, mean to you when it comes to your father's legacy and that of your mother?
Quite frankly, the King Center was the organization, and is, that my mother founded with family and friends to continue and institutionalize the work of Dad. Perhaps had Mom not done that, we wouldn't be where we are today, because I think people understood the work that Dad was doing, but to understand and evaluate and analyze and continue, it took an institution that was designed partially to teach and train people in nonviolence, teaching us how to live together without destroying either person or property. Obviously, we haven't learned that lesson. But also, Mom and a team of people, along with Stevie Wonder and a host of others, it had to be the United States Congress that voted on it, but they were lobbied by a number of people. And of course, Stevie played a huge role in making sure there was a King holiday. So I think there were a confluence of things that created not just the center. I mean, I just think it's remarkable when you think about the fact Dad was killed on April 4th, just about now 50 years ago, just a few weeks from now. And in June of 1968, this organization was created. The vision of what it was going to be was created at that point. It takes you sometimes several years to plan institutions like this. So it was revolutionary, in my judgment, the leadership of my mom and her team to put this institution in place. And here it stands 50 years later. And while I would say the organization has done great work, we've not scratched the surface yet of what can become, the nation and world to become.
Legacy can mean any number of things to a lot of people. Are you happy or satisfied with how your dad's legacy has been defined?
No. And I take some responsibility, as others who are keepers of the dream should. And what I mean by that is our society and maybe mainstream media have sanitized who Martin Luther King Jr. was. And as a result, people really don't truly know. They understand the essence through the I Have a Dream speech, but there are hundreds of speeches of Dad's that people have not dissected. And certainly between the latter years, 65 on, Dad was hated. I mean, he became the darling once he was dead and couldn't lend his voice. Then everybody, we love Dr. King. But in his life, people hated him, including people in our own community. Now, part of that responsibility is we've not done enough, meaning the center, meaning the family, meaning the bearers of the dream, but all of, we can and we must and we will do better, because we've got to find a way to make Martin Luther King Jr.'s message relevant to current crisis that exists. I mean, we can just take the example of this tragic shooting in Parkland, Florida, just a few days ago. Dad used to tell us we must learn nonviolence or we'll face non-existence. Well, when you look at the crisis in North Korea and other things, if we don't handle these conflicts correctly, it's over. And I don't want to sound like Dick. I heard you interview Dick Gregory. And you kept trying to ask me, what does that mean, Greg? What does that mean? It's over. It's over. Well, I don't mean it in that way. What I mean is, yes, if we don't take some proactive steps, then yes, this world could be destroyed. I believe there's a great amount of humanity in the human being. I think right now, this particular moment, these children in Florida are showing us that, look, this is wrong. We're going to get something done about it. Up to now, we hadn't done anything. That's one issue, but there are hundreds of issues that we must address. Then we must address it in our own community, because we are constantly in our cities wiping each other out, because we've been taught and programmed to hate ourselves. And until we learn to go back to the basic tenets of love, which is what Christ taught, which is what Dad taught, which is what Gandhi taught, which is what the Dalai Lama taught, and so many others. We're not learning that message. So as it relates to Dad's being sanitized, we got to change that.
I frequently say this in speeches. I've said it on television, I've said it on radio, and so I have no problem saying to you that the issue that I have is that your father has become what I call America's civil rights mascot. That he's treated as sort of this bobblehead figure that, wanted everybody to love each other, didn't want there to be friction, that he was, and when you hear folks describe him, it is as if the radical revolutionary that he was, didn't exist, that he was just this mild, meek-mannered, just go along to get along guy, and it's gonna all work out. And then when you see politicians, and for me not to focus on any one party, but when you see a Speaker Paul Ryan, when you see other members of Congress, when you see a Donald Trump, when you see these folks make these statements and send these tweets out, and you're going, but every policy position you have is 100% against exactly what he stood for. It ticks me off. How does it make you feel?
Well, beyond angry. I mean, it's everyone has found a way to try to use Dad for their own purposes. And I might add another dynamic that I'm sure you are aware of, but maybe some of the listeners are not. And that is, he wasn't killed because he was organizing folks to be able to sit in the front of a restaurant or go to a movie. He was killed because he talked about a radical redistribution of wealth. He understood the whole 1% scenario that we are embraced with now. 1% of the population controls 40-50% of the wealth, and we're headed in that direction. That is a remedy for disaster and destruction. And all he was saying is we got to find a better way to create opportunity so all boats are lifted. And because he said that, that's when they said, and he was getting traction with whites because the Poor People's Campaign was not a black effort. It was blacks and whites and Latinos and certainly all poor communities. And so he was right on point. That's a radical Martin Luther King Jr. that we don't talk about. And the war in Vietnam, that was one of the things that every leader who was supportive of him after he came out against the war, because President Johnson had signed and gotten past the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of '65, but yet Dad was looking at it from a moral standpoint. This is wrong and unjust, and it will not serve us, and it is not right. And so those are all the things that made people hate him. So when I hear people, I'm grateful that people would attempt to utilize his words. But it's always the context that's very perplexing and confusing and insensitive. And so what we need to do is we need to have total education about who Martin Luther King Jr. was. Maybe if they truly understand that, maybe they won't use it in that way.
You talked about him being assassinated. I've always said there's absolutely no coincidence that it was 1 year to the day that he gave the speech at Riverside Church Beyond Vietnam. Mm-hmm. I just don't believe there's any coincidence. I think that was a message.
Well, certainly that was part of the message. I certainly, and see, that's a whole complicated set of circumstances because, again, you know, the mainstream media wants you to believe that James already killed Dad. That's a different issue than what you're talking about.
No, but I'm going to ask you about that anyway, but go ahead.
But what we need to look at is not who, but what. What created the climate? What climate was in this nation? In fact, that's really part, we have allowed a climate, because we can change this as Americans and others from around the world. We've allowed this climate of violence to persist and be risen to the top. I mean, many movies that we go to see are violent. Many of the cartoons used to be violent. They're better now. And certainly all of the video games, 7 out of 10 of them are about blowing up something, shooting something. You wonder why your society is violent? Because you're constantly programming it through your entertainment. And so the public has to demand something different or stop patronizing. And so I'm saying all that, though, to say, the dad was prophetic about all of these issues. And that the confluence is what got him killed. The primary issue was, yes, he was talking against the Vietnam War. And what people don't even realize, 50,000 people, soldiers, were killed. Their bodies were brought back, some of those, with poppy seeds. So you had the mob mad at Dad because they were putting heroin out in the community. People don't realize this or know this. Many people don't. You had certainly the politicians. The president was angry with Dad. In theory, President Johnson maybe should have come to his funeral, but he couldn't for a number of reasons. Then you had, racists just in general, the racist people, those people that existed in the nation who were angry. All of that confluence they all came together, and because of the speech, the war in Vietnam, beyond Vietnam, he was killed. And for me personally, that was the most traumatic incident in my life ever, losing a father publicly, along with the world. We saw it on television. In other words, I was sitting in our family room. We were all of us, I think all 4 of us, and it was flashed across the screen. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has just been shot. We rushed back to Mom's room to get some understanding. Well, what happened? And Mom was preparing to go because she had received a call, go to Memphis, from Andrew Young and Jesse Jackson. And so she actually was preparing to go. She got to the airport, and the mayor of the city was walking toward her, and she could tell that the way he was walking there was not going to be good news. And he said to him, I'm sorry, Mrs. King, Dr. King did not survive. So she came back home to comfort us, the 4 of us, and explain to us, in these words I remember, your father has gone home to live with God. I don't remember her saying he was assassinated. She never used that harsh language. He's gone home to live with God. You'll see him. But when you see him, he will not be able to hug and kiss you as he often did. But one day, you'll see him again. That was sufficient for me, but my siblings continued, the older ones, Yolanda and Dexter, continued to ask questions. I accepted what Mom said for the time being, although I was just kind of in a daze. It was like, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to make it without Dad? Our lives are ruined.
When I talked to Bernice, she talked about not just losing him, being assassinated, but the trauma of the next 6 years of losing your uncle, and she said,
and grandmother
being killed. She said, how can you drown? There's no water in your lungs. Then losing your grandmother being killed. And she said, I don't think people really don't understand that level of trauma, and then being fearful of your mother not coming home. And so from your perspective, talk about just what life was like in the aftermath of 68 forward, dealing with all of that. And you were how old when your father was assassinated? Yeah. So for you, this is 10 to 16.
That's right. Well, first of all, it was, I'll characterize it this way. The trauma I experienced was after Dad was killed, then Uncle A.D., in June of 69. And I believe I always saw these notices on television interrupting the TV. We got to stop. And that was the trauma. And
so breaking news.
Breaking news. And that's what happened with my grandmother as well. So for many years, I was like, every time breaking news, oh God, there's something else happening to my family. That's the first instinct that happened. It took me a long time to get over that trauma. that there's not something happening with my family because it always was a public issue. And I don't know how we recover over time. You do recover, but trauma is something major. And certainly, the public probably doesn't even, the majority of the public has no idea. Certainly not even about my grandmother. There's some who know about my grandmother, but many don't. And they certainly don't know about my uncle. And I just thought he was a great swimmer. So for him to just mysteriously drown was always a perplexing question to us. We always wondered, there's got to be more. And he had been trying to get to the truth about his brother's death. So again, people didn't know that.
Did you, where you talked about openly, seeking professional help? Did you seek that out? Because that's a lot for a young person.
I did not, and I don't remember. I remember some counseling sessions, but it certainly was not enough. You know, in the African American community, we always thought when you did that, we were crazy. You were crazy. I mean, that was a marking.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is some of the greatest leaders in our world have always had counseling, and that's what helps them to become even greater. So I wish that I had more. I did not. I had some limited counseling, and I think we as a family, now maybe later on, each one of us may have sought additional assistance, but I never did, and I wish I had, quite frankly.
Earlier you mentioned James Earl Ray. Your family was very vocal in not believing that he was the assassin. Andrew Young, and I believe, was it Dexter?
Dexter was who
went to see him and interviewed him, and it was recorded.
That's correct.
Of course, that was a congressional commission. Lewis Stokes was a chair of the Assassination Commission, Walter Fauntroy. When I think back to April 4th, Andrew Young talks about the bushes right across the street, and then the next day, all of a sudden, they're removed. And you would go, wait a minute, a crime scene altered by police? Do you still hold those feelings that we don't know the actual truth?
Oh yeah, I'm not going to go out and take a trumpet and tell the people. If people want to know the truth, I know the truth.
And what do you think? What's the truth?
Well, the truth, quite frankly, is that there was a serious conspiracy. We, through this trial, we had a civil suit against Lloyd Jowers. I believe it was in 98 or 99. Mm-hmm. And that suit brought over 70 witnesses who testified and corroborated everything that had happened. So what I believe, or what I know, not believe, is that there were a confluence of a number of entities involved, from the federal government to local leadership in Memphis. And, you know, that's a whole show by itself. So I don't really want to focus on that. Again, what I want to focus on is the symptoms in this country that created this tragic event. And if our nation had been embracing and listening to what he was saying, the ideals, and going back to something else you said, I think we idolize Dad, but we are not living up to the ideals, as my wife often says. When you idolize something, you can put it on a shelf, and you dust it off every time there's a King holiday, or you dust it off on April 4th, and you feel good about we're doing this. But it's really living the ideals that he wanted us to embrace. And we are nowhere near there at this time. There are individuals who are embracing them, and some communities. But by and large, our nation has not embraced his ideals. And so that's the bobblehead thing that you talked about. We idolize him, and we sanitize him. But we are afraid of the revolutionary king in one sense. And what I mean by that is, when you start talking about redistributing wealth and resources, number one, people feel like, well, you're going to take my money? What does that really mean? How does that work as it relates to capitalism? We made all this money off the backs of various people, and now we have to give it up. All he was saying is money had to be spent in a different way. Because quite frankly, and the other thing, he was talking about a living wage in 1968. We're still trying to get 67 all through that period, 66 on. And we're still trying to get the minimum wage raised. I mean, that's great, but the minimum wage is not going to create the opportunity for people to live. In a country with a $20 trillion plus economy, there's something wrong with this.
You had started an initiative and want to know what's the status of that, where you went around the country and was looking at Martin Luther King drives and saying how, for the most part, they are largely in black neighborhoods. People use it as a negative, that when you say MLK Drive, folks think crime, downtrodden. Status of that initiative, and what would you say to black people where there's an MLK Drive?
Well,
and what it looks like and what it represents?
The first thing is it's up to us as a community to tidy up our what we value. I mean, you know, Martin Luther King Drive maybe should be the way that we value some of our cars. I mean, if you live in the worst conditions, but when you bring a certain kind of car into the neighborhood, people not gonna mess with it, particularly if they know who, you know, some certain people own that. People will steal. That's a different discussion. But by and large, there's respect for that vehicle. We need to respect our neighborhoods, our communities that are Martin Luther King Jr. communities in that same way. And the other thing that we've got to do as it relates to that initiative, the initiative is, I won't say stalled, but it is not moving forward the way I would like to see it moving. I'm not leading the initiative. I was a part of a group that was discussing ways to address it. I believe it still can be done, but one of the things we have to think about is black folks spent $1 trillion last year. Over $1 trillion, in fact. Now, we have, 15, 20 black banks? Not one of them has $1 billion. Not one. Collectively, they may only have just a few billion. My point is, if we had 10 banks and we had $100 billion, 10 billion and 10 banks, we could dramatically change our community because we could provide loans for entrepreneurship, we could build better schools, we could build more businesses, or we could build more housing. And so to some degree, there's an educational process that has to take place in our own communities. I think that's where it starts. I think we need not a strategic plan. I think we need an African-American think tank, not just the Joint Center for Political Studies, which used to do some good stuff and may still be doing some stuff. But we need something like a Brookings or a Hoover or these great institutions. Everything that Reagan did was planned by the Hoover and Brookings Institute many years ago. We should have had something around the African-American community that was designed, where you pay people $150,000 just to think. They don't have to worry about it. When you don't have to worry, we're stressed out. Our adrenals are blown up as a community because we are overstressed. We're overstressed with racism. We're overstressed with just trying to make ends meet. And the society and climate has been created. So we've got to find a way to relax all of that, to peel all that back, and then to figure out how do we build bridges to lift up our communities. And I'm convinced we can do it. We have not up to now, but we can.
Obviously, there is so much that happens annually around your father's birthday. It's going to be a lot that's going to be happening around April 4th. They're expecting 50,000+ people to come to Memphis. Journalists from across the world are preparing to be there. You mentioned earlier idolizing. What do you want people to know before they come to Memphis, and what they should be doing when they leave after April 4th?
I think the first thing that I want people to know and understand is this is a huge milestone, commemoration in the history of this nation. But we have to quadruple our efforts in embracing those ideals of Martin Luther King: freedom, justice, equality, righteousness. We've got to drill all the way down to the very basics. One of the things that happened, as you certainly are aware, the progressive communities and others helped to elect President Obama and then sat down. The right wing never sleeps. Every generation, Mother used to say, has to regain its freedom. That means that we should have never sat down, even during those 8 years. We should have been helping, and the president asked us to help him. President Obama asked us, but we didn't do anything.
But there were a lot of people though. But he asked us to help, but there were a lot of black folks who said, they wanted no criticism, they wanted no critique, they wanted no push. I literally sat with numerous people, folks with multiple degrees who said, no, we can't, the brother got a lot on his plate. We shouldn't ask for anything because white folks may not vote for him. And so he got to get a second term. And I literally said, wait a minute, are y'all actually saying that some white folks you don't even know are keeping you from asking for a return on your investment in terms of your vote? And folks said yes. And civil rights leaders, I've sat with many of them, they said we could not make any demands because our own members would say, how dare you, what are you doing? And as a result, the president knew. And I've talked, look, people get mad at me all they want to. He made it clear. Y'all can say whatever you want to, they gonna always be with me. So we had this confluence of events that we just happy you're there.
That is absolutely true. And I think we all were very proud and did not want to embarrass and did not want, there were a few, Tavis and certainly Dr. Cornel West and a few others who were constantly challenging the president. Most were embracing and lifting him up. And I think we should have done both. That's what leadership requires.
Here's what I said. What I've said is we focused on him being the first black president and forgot he was the 44th.
Mm. Well, that's very powerful. And I might add, every other president delivered for people. Bill Clinton delivered for a number of folks in the African-American community. A lot of every other president, President Bush delivered for some black folk, but delivered for his base. And the presidents go on and on. That's always been the case until President Obama, where there was no expectation that he's going to deliver for the African-American community. And that's our fault. You can't blame white folk for that. That's us. We did not do what we were supposed to do. So we got a President Trump, and it has created a condition very interesting. As much as we dislike much of what he promotes, it is causing a mobilization that we've never ever seen of people coming together who would not have come together had it not been. And I'm not suggesting that it's good. The good part is it's happening.
Right.
The bad part is that we allowed him to be elected.
Well, and that's the thing that I'm gonna come back to that point, but something that struck me when I thought about, and Bernice and I talked about it, when I think about your father's book, Chaos or Community, Where Do We Go From Here? When he talked about, he said there will be many of our white allies who will not be with us. It's the moderate white that we should be concerned about. And I guess the problem for me is that America has only provided us elements of freedom when they were forced to. It's a problem that, all of a sudden folks are mobilizing because of the rise of Trump, as opposed to, no, you mobilize and organize to make sure that doesn't happen. See, now you're forced to, but had you done that, you wouldn't be in the situation that you're in. Are you hopeful that people will realize that you can't be reactive? You can't just wait to you can't be like America. Oh, space shuttle blew up. Oh, might want to fix those O-rings. When we knew the problem existed before it actually happened. We wait for things to happen and then we react.
That is definitely true, but I think there are a number of things, and that's one of the points that I want to raise. Dad went to visit President Kennedy in '61 and asked him, do you have any civil rights initiatives that you are going to present? Oh, no. Well, Dr. King, I'd love to, but I got some other domestic priorities. So Dad and his team said, okay, we've got to precipitate a nonviolent crisis so that they have no choice. So they were proactive. We are not, you're right, we're not proactive. I don't know how you learn that when you are dumbed down as much as we have become. We've allowed mainstream media to dumb us down, whether it is a CNN or an MSNBC or a Fox or any of the others. Most of them have dumbed us down. Now, of course, you didn't do that. You did a great job.
Well, unfortunately, the show got canceled, and that's, for me, that's one of the issues for black networks. If we don't have our own daily news shows, we're not able to counter that and provide information. And same for black newspapers, black radio. We've got to have our own communication apparatus.
Well, and that's a frustration. Now, maybe through the social media outlets, it can be done, because even if the mainstream or traditional modes are not used,
right,
it's going to get out. The message is going to get out because it's too, I mean, social media is just, it's going to grow. It's going to probably overshadow mainstream at some point in the not too distant future. So I guess my higher point is all of us have an obligation. We abandoned our obligation, certainly for those 8 years. And, you know, I think now, as you said, we're forced. But there's going to be something positive out of this. I mean, I've never seen in recent years young people mobilizing like they are because of Parkland. And this is across the country, not just. I mean, there have been sprinklings of it, particularly Black Lives Matter. We have to commend those brothers and sisters who are every day out here on the front line. I mean, the media may not cover it, but they're out there doing it. They are making a difference in communities. No, police brutality and misconduct has not stopped. In fact, I'll say that we did a march back for the 37th anniversary, I want to say in 2000, Sharpton and I, through the 37th anniversary of March on Washington. We led that march, and we had over 100,000 people come to Washington, and the issue was police brutality and misconduct. We were about to get some things done, about a year and a half. Then in 2001, Bush came in. When Bush was in, 9/11 occurred. It re-empowered police. I mean, we were about to get responsible legislation. So we've got to go back to some of that. And then we've got to have community policing. We've got to have diversity sensitivity, human relations training. We've got to have civilian review boards. Because how are you going to investigate yourself? Police can't investigate it. I mean, they do it. They have these internal affairs divisions, but that's still investigating self. We need independent review. That's why citizen review boards who help to make those decisions will begin to change some of that. And the final thing is that, you know, maybe we need to start filing some major suits against these departments. And we need to find a legal team to be able to lay it out, put it together, because that's the only thing that mainstream America understands, when you tamper with the money.
You met with Trump before he was inaugurated. We're now more than a year after that. Your assessment of what he said in the meeting compared to what he's actually now done as president. Second part, should he be in Memphis April 4th?
I don't know how you come to Memphis in hypocrisy. So here's what I'd say. First of all, President I talked about voter suppression. He talked about voter fraud. Two different issues. There's no voter fraud. His fraud commission blew up. There's still been voter suppression all over the country, and that's going to be one of the greatest concerns about next year, because the Republican governors and legislatures have drawn the lines in such a way that it makes it difficult for communities of color and
gerrymandering
students and seniors to vote because they don't have the right ID. So that's a concern. The point is, what I had hoped to happen, because he said the idea that I had, which was about an ID, that sounds like a good idea. Let's talk about it when I'm actually in the Oval Office. He had said he wanted us to come. I was hoping we would, but I wasn't sure that it was going to happen, and it hasn't. And secondly, I believe fundamentally that you have to always appeal. Somebody's got to be talking to this president.
Well, here's the deal, though. Okay, so if he said that, and he has not had a meeting with civil rights leadership
At all. And he's been told, he's challenged on that.
Well, here's the deal. Well, since he said it to you, will you publicly issue him the challenge to meet with civil rights leaders for a real substantive conversation, or even challenge him to do a listening session like he did with the Parkland folks? Yeah. I mean, and publicly challenge him to say, you said you want to do this more than a year in, where is it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'm certainly, I'm all in and want to be a part of pushing that and hopefully getting it done. Because it can't just be, and it has to be serious. There's, you've spent a large amount of time, consciously or unconsciously, dividing America. And the president should be finding ways to bring people together. Now, this Parkland issue, this tragedy in Parkland and in Broward County and at Douglas School is one issue, but there are a myriad of issues that have to be addressed. And it is imperative that soon he sit down with the civil rights leadership, in my judgment. And hopefully this issue, the Parkland issue, will make it easier.
But here's where we are. This is the 50th anniversary of the sanitation workers strike. Mm-hmm. The 50th anniversary assassination of your father. 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act. And then, of course, you have Secretary Ben Carson issue an edict where cities did not have to submit their plans on how they would end segregated housing, giving them that waiver from an Obama-era role. The 50th anniversary of the Poor People's Campaign. The 50th anniversary of the Kerner Commission report on race riots. And we have a president who will not sit down with civil rights leadership, will not sit down with black media, and you have these huge different events, and it's kind of like whatever. And that to me, and I've challenged him directly and his administration as well, made the request to him. I'm saying you have got to sit down with these constituents. If you want to say you're the president of everyone, you've got to sit down with these folks.
But there's no question about that. And I think you're absolutely correct in relationship to not only has it not happened, it seems like it's a distant hope. But when he continues to do some of the things that he does, it makes it very difficult for leadership to even want to engage. That doesn't mean that somebody shouldn't. That just means that you understand the difficulty. In other words,
but from your point, shouldn't they engage? Here's what I say. Here's what I say. When he had the cabinet there, and they were all around the table, and he kept the cameras there, and they were all praising him. This is what I say. I say, fine, we meet. Leave the cameras here. Leave the cameras on. Make this an open discussion. Let America be a part of, like when President Obama had the healthcare deal. No. Let's have an open conversation. Civil rights leadership, president, open, so they can hear the dialogue.
That is ideal, and it's real, and it could happen. But it only happens when we are organized. Mm-hmm. If you understand what
I got it. Understand.
Like I said, we spent $1 trillion. Where did we spend it and why? Because we wanted something to make us feel good temporarily. So if we decided as a community, okay, I'm going to exercise my buying power elsewhere. I'm going to stop doing this. I'm not advocating a boycott, but I'm saying sometimes you have to take extreme measures to get results that you want.
I just asked you, April 4th, should he come? And if he does come, what should he learn? Should he be in Memphis April 4th?
I don't know if I can answer that. I think he'd have to come in a totally different spirit, in a totally different vein. I mean, he would have to if he had some revolutionary announcement to make, yes, maybe, that he as the president was going to do, that addressed workers' rights, that addressed poverty, that addressed a lot of the serious issues. Yes, that would make sense.
So you're saying if he doesn't?
If he's going to come with the same,
Right.
For what purpose? I mean, what is he going to say? In theory, yes, the president should be there, whoever the president is at this particular time. But this president, in my judgment, should only come if he has something profoundly that is going to change the complexion of what things he's done in the past have been.
So you're saying
I've learned, I think, because I want to create a unified America.
So you're saying don't make this a checkoff event. Don't make it a photo op.
Oh,
it has to be substantive.
Absolutely not. My father and others didn't die for this to be relegated to just something that you do as a photo op. There's serious work. There are people suffering all over this country. And not just black people, but black poor people disproportionately. We know. There's a criminal system. It's not a just system. If it was just, it wouldn't be 60% and 70%, 80% African American, and then Latino and Hispanic, and then poor white folk. So there's no justice for African Americans by and large. If you have money and resources, yes, you can get decent counsel, and perhaps you can get some justice. But the system does not work. It's full. I mean, you got 2.5+ million people in jail. More people in jail in this country than any country on the planet. I mean, there's something wrong with that. That shows how, you know what I say? We're dysfunctionally functional. And you say, well, that's an oxymoron. Yes, it is. But the reality is the way we've conducted ourselves shows us we're dysfunctionally functional. That we got to change.
You, out of your siblings, you're the only one with a child, daughter. Earlier you talked about caretakers of the dream. You have the King Center, King family, you have the Institute, Stanford, you have all these different entities out there. Folks are aware of back and forth between you and your brothers and sisters. How do you ensure that 50 years from now, it will be taken care of in good hands? Because for black folks, and obviously even America and the rest of the world, who tells the story and how the story is told is even more critical than it just being told. Because it can become some other sort of narrative. Well, how do you ensure that?
Well, I can say as it relates to our daughter, my wife and I are instilling values in her. She may decide, I don't want to do this. But the hope is that she will be willing and want to take up the mantle. Just knowing who she is. Let me share this story. And this is unprompted. A couple years ago, we went to Washington. The president invited us to the White House, President Obama that is, to see the bust of Dad, because we had heard it was there, but we had not seen it. Got to see it before he left. It was a little late, but nevertheless, we got to see it. So I told her, think about some questions you want to ask the president. Now, this is over 2 years ago. You know what her question was? She was probably 7 years old. Mr. President, what are you going to do about these guns? I see my children getting killed. Now, this is a long time before Park. A 7-year-old kid, Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King's granddaughter, and Martin Luther King III and Andrea Waters King's daughter. That's one of her first questions. The next question, at a later point, she wanted to know, you know, she was petrified of what when he became president, what candidate Trump was articulating. She wanted to know, what are we going to do to stop this that is dividing our nation? Now, that's not a question I told her or my wife told her. This is what she was thinking about. At 7 years old, I wasn't thinking about no guns. I wasn't thinking, like, oh, I want to go play. So to me, there's great hope in young people.
How did President Obama respond? Did he give it look like,
initially,
she's 7?
Yeah. Initially, he's tried to give a little, well, you don't have to worry about that. And she kept looking at him like, what do you mean? And eventually he had to develop an answer. He said, look, we're working with Congress, we're going to do all we can to make sure that you and all children are safe. So he came around to an answer that she accepted. But I just thought it was, it was quite amazing to me that at 7, this is what was on her mind. Because I certainly, at 7, wasn't there. So I have great hope. I'm not concerned about the legacy being preserved, because I'm sure Yolanda Renee, and she's going to develop a cadre of others to work with her, is going to do her part to make sure that her grandfather and grandmother's legacy lives eternally.
For you, April 4th cannot be an easy date every year. How do you deal with that?
Well, let me just tell you what I have. I first have to acknowledge the loss to my mother of her husband and my siblings, our father. That's the very first thing. That was a loss that cannot be replaced. But then I look further and I have to glean and understand that the nation garnered a message and an understanding of a movement. And that is, I mean, for example, you know, if Dad had not been killed, well, probably we wouldn't be dealing with the things we're dealing with first of all. We'd be at a different place. But had he been killed in a different way, it was the way, the trauma, the traumatic way that he was killed that I think makes his message, his movement, even more lasting. I think it would have been lasting regardless, because Dad was just connected. I mean, I wish that I had that level of connection that he had, not just to God, but to the universe and to human service. I mean, you say something like, if a man hadn't found something worth dying for, he isn't fit to live. And you do it. You know, now, I may be willing to die for my child, my wife, and my child, but I'm not ready to go. I mean, most of us are not. But you have to be very poignant and strong. Figure out, you got to be willing to die for what you believe in. That's when people are very serious. You know, Hosea used to say.
Hosea Williams.
Williams, I should say. Hosea Williams would say.
I know, but for the folks who don't know, go ahead.
I appreciate you sharing that. You know, he was looking at a picture, Dad, and Hosea Williams was a complex man. He was a chemist, as you may know. But he was an agitator. He had alcohol problems. He had all kinds of things, all kind of flaws like we all do as human beings. And he used to attack my mom. And so I was going over there to deal with him. Say, now look, you say you love Dr. King, and I'm sure you did, but you're always attacking my mom. Dr. King's vision wasn't about no bricks and mortar. It was about feeding folk. Well, all of that is included. So what you're saying is not quite right. But I never got around to saying this because he looked up at this picture of Dad above his and he said, you know, I love your dad. I never met a man like him. He said he did two significant things. He conquered the love of wealth and the fear of death. I said, my God. Say that again. He conquered the love of wealth and the fear of death. Now understand, when you don't really care about money, you know things are going to be all right, and you're not afraid to die, you're unstoppable. And that's the kind of spirit that all of us need if we want to address these critical issues today. Not being afraid of what people are going to say or who's going to follow us, particularly if you know you're standing on justice. You're standing on the shoulders of great individuals, because we've had great people in our nation's history and world. It didn't start with Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King Jr. certainly was one of our greatest of our time. But you know, there have been great people going way back who did things with nothing. I mean, you go back to think about Harriet Tubman, who said she could have freed more folk if they knew they were slaves. I mean, we've had some. Think about Frederick Douglass. I mean, the list goes on. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, and the list goes on and on. Of so many, and the inventors. And that's. I mean, we don't really, as Black people, honestly, we really don't truly realize who we are. We don't realize we were kings and queens, and that civilization began on the African continent. Most of us don't realize that because we're taught negatively. Now, I don't know what Black Panther is going to do, the movie, to change some of that, because this has never happened. We've never had an almost all Black African cast that is charted all past the numbers. I mean, that's phenomenal, quite frankly.
There was so much drama, anger, confusion after your mother's funeral, revolving around Harry Belafonte. I interviewed you, the Chicago Defender at the time.
Right.
about that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of hurt feelings for a long time. But we were at Sharpton's conference last year in 2017, and Harriet Belafonte was being honored. And he publicly forgave you and the family. Had y'all previously talked about that, or did that catch you by surprise? And what were you feeling when you heard him say how it was important that be done?
I don't want to say I was totally surprised. We had not spoken, period, recently. But I've always had incredible respect and love for him because I know what he went through. I know that he brought entertainers and other celebrities to the table throughout the movement. I mean, he and Daddy were close friends. So I knew all that. I always expect, and he always personifies the best from his perspective, which is generally truth, in my judgment, truth to power. That's, you may not agree with him, but he's telling the truth. And I've always respected and admired that in him. And so I've always loved him, even though the conflict had occurred during Mom's funeral. So to hear him say what he said, I called him the next day. And we had a rather, it was a short conversation, but I was basically telling him how much I appreciated him and loved him and what he continues to do at 80 plus, 85 or 6 plus. I mean, he's amazing. And that's the way I see him. And, I was saddened that we went through what we went through. But, I think we're on the right track. I had a meeting with him about 5 years ago, and he talked about addressing it then. He said, look, I don't know how long I'm going to be here. I don't want these issues to harbor. I grew up a little bit with his son David and his daughter Gina, his younger children. I knew Sherry and Adrian. I knew them, the older ones, but I knew David because David and I are the same age, and we haven't really talked in a long time. I'll see Gina periodically, but I just thought that was so powerful what he did, because only he could do that. I was just there to present the award, and what it showed was reinforced was the level of respect and love that he had for Martin Luther King Jr. And that generally gets passed on to the family. And he certainly had that. That never got lost, but somehow there was some disconnection at a certain point. And my hope is that we're back connected together. In fact, I'm going to be going to New York soon, and I'm going to reach out to him.